Morning. Oh. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the plenary session for James Siburt. We'll begin shortly. I just want to wait a few seconds for everyone to be fully joined in. Always takes a couple of seconds. Okay, I think everyone's in, so I'm going to hand it over to Spencer.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for participating in this live session, and please remind your friends to also take the opportunity to see the recorded session as well. I would like to take this moment to, in addition to welcoming and thanking everyone, I'd like to introduce Jim Siburt. I've known him for many years. He's a colleague. He's now moved on to another university, and I'm going to read his bio to make sure I'm accurate. Dr. James Eric Siburt is an assistant professor and director of management and leadership at Immaculata University. It's near Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, for those of you who do not know. His interdisciplinary research is primarily focused on the semiotic analysis of cultural narrative, which informs sociological understanding of power, which is a defining aspect of leadership. His research on power deals with stories, religious, sociological, theological, and mythical stories. It provides insight into how narratives serve as a powerful strategy that shapes and perpetuates normative perspectives in societal groups, organizations, politics, leadership, and culture. Dr. Siburt is the co-author of Theological Archetypes in Science Fiction, a forthcoming book from Fortress Academic, and Fairy Story Leadership, A Theology of Power and Tolkien's Creation Mythology and Theology in Tolkien from Rowan and Littlefield. And he is a co-host of a podcast entitled Retelling that discusses the memetics of narrative themes and culture. It is available on all major podcast platforms. That was Retelling, R-E-T-E-L-L-I-N-G. So it's my pleasure to welcome Jim, and I'm looking forward to hearing his talk as well. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Spence. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up here. All right, so this morning we're going to be talking about memetics, memes, semiotics, but specifically sort of the memetic memes, signifiers of memetic behavior in organizational structures. So I want to start out just with a little bit of an exercise with this phrase that says, once the cat had crossed her path, she knew her luck had changed and not for the better. So what I'd ask you, you probably all know what color the cat is without me even telling you the color of the cat. I would say probably most cultures, if not all cultures, would hold to some aspect of what color this cat is. And so just sort of thinking about that how a phrase itself without any other information sort of triggers an understanding of, or provides information to you without having to explicitly share that and say that. So when we think about where does this come from, how does this happen, we sort of think about how we are as human beings. So biologically, we are sort of deprived of a man-made world. We structure a human world, and this world, of course, is culture. Its fundamental purpose is to provide the firm structure for human life that's lacking biologically. Culture, although it becomes for us a second nature, remains something quite different from nature. Precisely, it's the product of our own activity. You think about animals. Animals don't have to create a culture. They have nature. It's designed for them. They adapt immediately. They can walk immediately. They can defend themselves in various stages depending on the species. But we have to create things. We have to build things. We have to make things. And when we do this, we produce language and its foundation, and by means of it, a towering edifice of symbols that permeates every aspect of life. And that's from Peter Berger's The Sacred Canopy. So we surround ourselves with everything we have created, we have made. We inherit it, we pass it on, we have it, it comes to us. And so when we think about it in a lot of different ways. And one person that has thought about that was Richard Dawkins, and he used the term meme. He liked the term meme because it rhymed with gene, but it was a neologism created by him to define an already known concept of the sign found in semiotics. Even his application of the biological metaphor was not new and preceded him by decades. But he was trying to express something, to connect to something, and his understanding and his term, the meme, became a meme in itself because it's recognized in a lot of different places as sort of that, what we see every day sort of popping up in social media. But Dawkins was initially concerned with the replication of the sign and not determining the meaning of the sign. And for Dawkins, the information the sign communicates is secondary to the sign's ability to persist through transference and replication. He really was looking at how does this sort of idea, this concept, this meme continue to persist? How does it replicate itself from person to person, culture to culture, and the like? One particular science fiction novel, cultural text, a piece is from Neil Stephenson, and it's his book Snow Crash. Snow Crash at one point was required reading for Microsoft employees, Xbox, the division, but it had things in it that very much sounded a lot like what Dawkins was talking about. And these are excerpts from that text that says, an expression like that is just like a virus, you know. It's a piece of information, data, that spreads from one person to the next. And then later on in the text, they say, now religion used to be essentially viral, a piece of information that replicated inside the human mind, jumping from one person to the next. And so this concept and idea of information, of knowing something, of understanding is connected in this sort of viral way. But when we think about this, we as a society has determined that the meme should be understood as a passing fancy, fugacious in nature and thus rendered trivial and harmless. The social media meme is perceived as a fleeting triviality that places mustaches on kittens. And all the while at its core lies a foundational signifier spanning generations and living rent-free within our collective consciousness. So this idea of signs, symbols, memes was not something new. As we can see, Hippocrates talked about the semiotikos, an observance of signs. The semeion constitutes a vital clue towards finding its physiological source. It's the announcement that something invisible might be present in the body. So from a medical perspective, the idea of signs coming together to give us information or understanding was not unknown. St. Augustine says that no one uses words except as signs of something else, and hence may be understood what I call signs. Thus these things to wit, which are used to indicate something else. Accordingly, every sign is also a thing, for what is not a thing is nothing at all. Everything, however, is not also a sign. And then we look at Locke, and John Locke talked about this idea of studying signs and symbols as the third branch of science, and called it semiotica, or the doctrine of signs, and the most useful whereof being words. It's an aptly enough termed also logic, the business whereof is to consider the nature of signs the mind makes use of for the understanding of things or conveying its knowledge to others. So this concept of the meme is really grounded in this science of semiotics, of signs and symbols. So it isn't anything new. And that's fine. I mean, interdisciplinary wise, we see things in other disciplines that connect to each other, and different persons have different ideas at different times in history and in different continents. I mean, the idea of semiotics, we have both Saussure and Peirce, who both simultaneously were talking about semiotics on two different continents. And so this idea of signs, symbols, memories, the way in which we connect to things is something that is haunting around in our human nature. So Dawkins also went on to say that memes should be regarded as living structures, not just metaphorically, but technically. When you plant a fertile meme in my mind, you literally parasitize my brain, turning it into a vehicle for the meme's propagation in just the way that a virus may parasitize the genetic mechanism of the host cell. So for Dawkins, he saw memes as sort of these, like a virus, right? All containing information that gets sort of plugged into the brain. And when that information comes into the brain, we respond to it. And he was keeping it pretty simple. It was sort of a packaged content. It wasn't breaking it down, taking a look inside of it, tearing it apart and finding the root part of the sign, which is what we do in semiotics. This, again, going back to Snow Crash, the text itself, there's a lot of this conversation there too about the way in which language functions in a way to change the thoughts and minds of other people, and they use computers and machine language, and basically talks that our brains are very similar to the machine language, the binary system that we designed. In other words, we don't know what that binary language is for the human mind, for the brain, but must be something that exists, because we then have different languages in different ways that tend to communicate the same things with different sounds that we produce with our mouths, or different symbols we put on paper or electronics or whatever else. And so the comparison to that is the idea that machine language is at its base for all computers, the same thing, but all the different programming languages that allows human beings to write machine language, C++, Fortran, on and on and on, gets compiled back into this machine language. And so the argument in that text is talking about that there's a base human language in the brain, but all of our languages that we use are really just ways for us to communicate something that gets compiled into something different. So if you find that interesting, I would suggest you read Snow Crash, which I think is a very interesting way of looking at a cultural product that continues this conversation that we have. Now, from a different perspective, if we look at Chandler's definition for this, he basically is counter that. It says meaning is not transmitted to us. In other words, whereas Dawkins would say that the meme is sort of like a virus that transmits meaning to us and it gets into our brains, a lot of semioticians would say that's not true. Meaning is not transmitted to us. We actively create it according to a complex interplay of codes or conventions of which we are normally unaware. Basically what I was talking about. Becoming aware of such codes is both inherently fascinating and intellectually empowering. And so there are ways in which I can say a term to someone, and they interpret it one way and someone interprets it a different way. One emoji that you use in a conversation might communicate something to one person, but may be offensive to another. And so we have to take into account that just because we've said something or transmitted something, that it's not actually connecting the way we think it would be. So an example of this is, if I were the conveyor of information, I'm the conveyor of information, and I'm speaking, writing, whatever I'm doing in human communication, conveying something that I want to say or I want someone else to understand, that goes out to somebody who's the receiver. And so I convey information based on my context, my education, the resources I have, the people that have influenced me, the socialization that I've had. Everything shapes the way in which I convey information. It shapes the way I'm conveying information to you this morning with my words, with the imagery. Everything that I'm doing is me working out of my context, trying to the best of my ability to convey something to all of you as the receiver. And so the receiver, though, each one of you has your own context, your own reality, your own way in which you've been shaped. You come from a different geographical location. You come from a different culture. You come from a different educational background. You come from different things you read, different persons who have influenced you. And so try as I might to convey something to you as a receiver, when I express that, I have no guarantee that it's not just going to explode into multiple meanings. And when we try to convey something to a group of people, such as in this setting, everyone has a different context and has different influences, has a different background, to where me saying something that I think is very clear and possibly and hopefully understandable might not be what I think it is. And so it really comes down to this idea of socialization. So socialization, however, has a crucial dimension that is not adequately grasped by speaking of a learning process. The individual not only learns the objectivated meanings, but identifies with them and is shaped by them. He or she draws them into themselves and makes them their meaning. They become not only one who possesses these meanings, but one who represents and expresses them. And so socialization shapes, and we can't ever guarantee that even twins are understanding the same thing, receiving the same message when it's being expressed, not to the person. One way of thinking about the way in which we do this, the way in which socialization works, the way in which this comes into play, we can look at Scott's organizational pillars, which is very influential, but he drew a lot upon sociology to come to that. So his cultural cognitive level of meaning is from sociology would be folkways, and what he considers normative is moreways in the social sciences, and what he sees as regulative is codified law. So very much the same thing, just in different terms. But the way in which things that are culturally cognitive, folkways, they are things that we just, from our culture, from what we're surrounded with, we just naturally know. Normative things are those things that, and mores are where people begin to have expectations on our behavior, on our language, on our action. It's more, that's more of sort of the society saying, these are the shoulds of this. And regulative and codified law, as we know, are regulations and laws. Really, it's the regulating of normative behavior. When normative behavior once needs to be influenced, the society will say, we consider this the norm, and if you don't do this, then these are the punishments, the coercions that go along with that. And so the strategies are different. We've talked about memes, but there's this mimetic aspect of it, not to be confused with the mimetic meme without the I, but the idea in which we copy, we mime, we mimic, we look at the way in which people interact and behave, and we do that experience. Hegemonic would be looking at things from the way in which society says this is the way the society works. This is who we are. We self-maintain these norms. I always tell students to think of hegemony like a hedge. You may not have planted it or put it in place, but you continue to maintain it because you like the separation, you like the security that it provides. And so it's sort of a self-perpetuating norm that we as society just accept and put into place. And so legitimacy for those things and recognition of those things, recognition is symbolic across the board, but there's also shared values, specific rules and laws. And legitimacy, again, is what I've been talking about. Some of it is just culturally supported, some of it is morally governed, and some of it is legally sanctioned. And so all of these things are at play in helping us to understand when we're in organizations, when we're in groups, how we should think, how we should behave, and what we're doing. So when we think about this from how we function in the society, we are individuals who are in family units, whatever that family unit might be, however it came about being. And those families are part of social groups. Social groups find themselves as part of organizations or within organizations. And all of that is within the sort of all-encompassing society in which we live. And so it all has influence upon the next that's there. And these influences are specific in the sense that they are social influences, they are political influences, and there are theological sort of influence that take place. And when I talk about theology, it's not the same as religion. Theology is more the way everybody has a theology on how they think the world should work, behave, and be. And so it's a little different way of considering that. So the dominant group always determines the memes that are maintained and passed along to subsequent generations in the social structure. Sometimes it's only the core of the meme, the kernel of the information, and this is what lies at the nucleus of the concept of retelling stories, of narrative. They may have various details but contain the essence of the meme. Hence, this role of story or narrative plays a huge part in this mimetic process, part of how we remember things. And not just any story. When we think about story and narrative, it can't just be any story, but it's those that have been deemed aesthetically valuable. And so the idea of aesthetically valuable, really aesthetics means perceived value. So it's the things that the culture of the society has said, we value this, we will continue to tell this, we will continue to share this. And so the meme requires mythology to transcend generations. So humanity preserves what it values and hides, sometimes destroying what it despises. And the social structure defines the memes that are retained for later generations. And so all of what Dawkins has been talking about with memory and what we're talking about with semiotics and the symbols and human culture all shape an understanding of an organizational process. So memory is a huge part of that. Dawkins talks and says that if it's any consolation, a meme could alternatively be thought of as being related to memory or to the French word meme. So that's from, again, from Dawkins, specifically in The Selfish Gene. And this idea of memory, though, has in itself its own flaws. So is a memory a trustworthy source of knowledge? We're thinking about organizations, we're thinking about organizational memory. A memory is a vital resource for imagining, and imagining is a vital process in making coherent sense of the past and connecting it to the present and the future. So when we recall an earlier experience, it's rarely, if ever, that experience as a whole. And this requires us to build imaginatively on what we recollect and make connections across time, always with the imperative need of the present, shaping what we bring back and bring together at any particular stage of time. And so memory and what we remember and how we retain that memory, just remembering data is difficult for us. We could probably do it for a short period of time, but more often than not, the two things that really help us with memory, the things that help us with allows a meme to be persistent, or allows a symbol or a sign to be persistent, is really the idea of story and place. Those are two of the strongest factors of memory. And so specific places, locations, architecture, landscape, as well as something that has a narrative or story about it, tends to be more memorable to us than other things. And so even the things that we look back and we're told as a child, or we think that we remember as a child, unless they were pretty traumatic, most of the time they are remembered because we were told the stories over and over and over again. We were shown pictures, we were shown videos. And so the memory gets placed with us based on that. We might not have a specific memory, but we believe we do because everyone has told us, do you remember when this happened? You did this, this, and this, and shows you a picture, and you're like, oh yes, I remember that. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. It depends on who we are. So when we think about this from an organizational perspective, thinking about organizations, organizations themselves are constructed of people, artifacts, structures, and mythologies. And so within the organization, we have these sort of things. So people, we know what we mean by people. Artifacts are anything, the database, the employee handbook, the product itself, anything that's an artifact or a piece of the organization would be under that. Structure would be the structure of the organization. It would be the building, the architecture, the design of that. All of that is important as part of the organization itself. Now, even with virtual sort of organizations, there's still a structure to that virtual organization. There's the website that you access. There's the different ways in which you digitally interact in a virtual space that gives us sort of a structure as well. And when I say mythologies, I'm meaning those stories, those narratives that shape it. Every organization has mythologies that are part of that organization, things that by mythology that define how the world should work and function. The mythologies define how the world of the organization should work and function. How did we get to be here? What is our purpose? How are we connected? Those mythologies, those stories are all part of that. If it's the type of organization where persons are more apt to hate annual reviews, right? Performance reviews. Or if it's an organization where they're doing annual reviews, not just once a year, but on the 360s, right? Happening all the time throughout the process of that. Those things turn into mythologies. Some people start to fear an annual review, whereas others look forward to annual reviews. It really just depends on the mythology of the organization, the story, the narrative that shapes that. So the architecture, the product developed, the mission, the vision, the motto, the logo, the language, the product, the industry, the field, mythologies, the lore, etc. in toto serve as signifiers of the mimetic memory of an organization. So what signifies meaning to a previous member of the organization will more than likely have a similar signification to another member of society who becomes part of that organization. And so key to that is the idea that if you are the member of a particular society and the organization exists within a particular society, there is a good chance that there is an overarching socialization that has taken place that provides familiarity to you that you bring into this workplace. And so if we were to look at this idea of organizational memory and what is going on with that, and we think about memes and we think about signs and symbols, sort of bringing this all down into this look at this issue of organizational memory. The reason that it seems like certain things are persistent when it comes to organizational change, and so persons can't change because it's the way we've always done things. That sort of saying that takes place. We think that it's focused on people. We believe that that the people themselves are the retainers of organizational memory. I would argue that it's far more complicated than that, that organizational memory is more than just the person. The organization exists because of people initiating the organization, people coming together at whatever point in history to bring together this organization. But I would argue that it's a little bit more than that. I think the mythologies, as I said, the structure itself, and the artifacts are all part of this organizational structure. And that memory comes from those artifact structures and mythologies that exist. Even if I change all the people and bring in a new group of people into this organization, the structure has not changed. The artifacts still exist. And so the structure and the artifacts trigger sort of memories that may not be my own, but are part of the societal thought. They're part of the overall society that exists. And so this idea that because this organization exists in a society that I am part of, that I will somehow, because of my socialization, be triggered by certain artifacts, structural symbols, shape of the building, whatever else, to behave in a particular way. And so Berger, going back to Berger again, was the one who said that we create culture and culture creates us. I find culture fascinating in organizational studies and leadership studies because it both informs and transforms. In other words, it informs us about the organization itself. It informs us about the society itself, whatever that aspect of cultural product might be. But in turn, it transforms us. It shapes us. It changes us. It makes us into the persons that we are. And that's the reason why in the very beginning, when I asked the question about that statement, about how someone's luck can change because a cat crossed their path, we can all pretty much assume in some ways that we know the color of that cat because it's so ingrained in more of a global understanding of the idea of bad luck. So all of that to say that it's a very, very complicated thing, and that no one particular source, Dawkins provides some really great information for us to look at, but there's a history of philosophers and semioticians and others who all come together to create a more interdisciplinary approach to understanding this idea of behavior and organizational structures. And so for us that think broadly, think outside of our contexts and are able to bring this information together, we can see a lot of similarities in different disciplines, but we can also find just slightly a little different pieces of things to probably come to even a deeper understanding of what it means to know how a organizational structure functions, and specifically how memory and change impact what's going on. So that is what I have for this morning.
Thank you. So we'll move into the questions. It looks like the first one we have is from Fatma. Fatma, did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, good morning.
Hi.
It is 4:30 in France, so for me, good afternoon. James, to ask a question, I want to share my screen because I want to share with you a recent study that we did with the collaborator. She's from American literature and I'm from management sciences, so it was multidisciplinary. And actually we gave a try to semantic and Gothic visualization of words. It was about the words published about workplace concept, because this is my major. And these are the basic things that we did all by using R. And what I want to show, so this was the word frequency, so what were the most mentioned words. But what made this study after more original or interesting, we can say, I explored a language which is called Zalgo. This is a language, in fact, that you get with a specific online software, that it translates the words in this form, kind of like darkness. And then my colleague, who is from this American literature, she interpreted them. She interpreted this darkness. So we gave a try in this way, just to interpret kind of management sciences or technical words in an abstract way, because this is abstract, this is not, this is not concrete. But I think this is a very useful perception to give maybe to the professionals to avoid them maybe to use or to see the words only just didactic technical expressions, to show them also what we keep in our background, or what the word, in which degree the words might be a light or might be a darkness. So I want to take your opinion about this.
No, I think that's great. I think you're transferring word back into a different symbol. You're giving a visualization to a particular word, and I think what I'm seeing on the screen is that sort of way in which the different darkness on that.
Yeah.
And so that in similar ways is very similar to what is referred to as a synectic practice. Synectics is sort of that practice. Some of you might be familiar with that, but synectics is that practice where something that someone is too close to, like the words are too technical, the words are businessy, they're connected to the person. And so by removing sort of any of that emotional, personal connection to something, you're shifted over into sort of this visualization of that. And so the way that synectics works would be to say, our organization is like a flower growing in the crack in a concrete, right? So what is a flower growing in a crack in the concrete like? And they begin to talk about that, not talk about the organization, which is close and personal, but begin talking about the flower as a crack in the concrete. The terms and information that comes from that, you take that and bring that back into the conversation again, right? And I think you can do the same. I mean, you can clarify that, doing the same thing with this, saying, here's the visualization of particular words. What do you think of that? Like, is the more darkness bad? Is more darkness, more solid good? I mean, or something like that. How would that work with sort of the interpretation of that and help them to better understand maybe from a different perspective? You're shifting perspective by doing that. So no, I think that's a great way to teach and to try to get around some of the obstacles of communication, where people can be sort of siloed and sort of hard and fast in their concrete and their understanding of things. So I very much love abstract concepts and ideas. So
thank you very much, James.
Yep.
And final question: do you think that the professionals or employees should get some trainings about this kind of communication ways?
I do. I think we should be doing more of this. I didn't mention that. I thought a lot about it, but I didn't mention this in the presentation. But teaching semiotics, right? The idea of signs and symbols, and the way in which we are more of a symbolic type of communicators, used to be a large part of higher education. It was a requirement in a lot of early institutions and universities. It may still be in some, so you can answer that for me. I think it still is in Canada. I think it may still be in some European colleges and universities, but in American colleges and universities, things like semiotics, which was a basis for understanding logic and language and communication, has gone. It's gone. When I teach healthcare workers and I talk about Hippocrates and semiotics and symbols, they make the connection, and then they're very interested in learning more about it, but we don't typically offer any courses in U.S. schools on that topic in general. So I think it is. I think it's valuable. I think if that was taught more to a lot of people, the way in which we are symbolic communicators would be invaluable. It would stretch us more into that abstract and move us out of our siloed sort of way in which we try to communicate that my understanding of the world and the reality is the reality. I think, which is a dangerous place to be, is where a lot of times we end up in a lot of our educational systems. So I applaud the work that you're all doing with that. It's great.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you very much for your answers. Very encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like the next question is from Bill. Bill, did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thanks. And look, thanks very much, James, for that very clear presentation and beautifully presented slides as well. So congratulations. It's very, very helpful in terms of, you know, the ideas we're thrashing out at the conference. One of the thoughts, though, I had as you were speaking is the word meme now has become a big word. It's used an awful lot. And the connotations around the word in popular discourse and everyday discourse are actually not entirely positive. So in other words, you know, a meme might be a cat picture with a silly, jokey comment on it. But also there are memes. I mean, how did QAnon become what it did except via memes? So memes are not things that people necessarily trust. And the question I want to ask is, how does one, you know, you've essentially presented a neutral view of memes. Memes are these things that get around. But how does one judge the validity of memes? You know, and how do we judge their success, not just on their success in spreading? There's a lot of memes spread, but they're not necessarily valid memes. So one of the questions, and it gets down to these questions of, you know, of truth, of knowledge, you know, how does one distinguish truths and things which are socially constructive from things which are trivial or destructive, if you know what I mean. So that was a question that was just running through my mind as you were speaking.
I wanted to, and I try to, I tend to end up being more diplomatic, but I wanted to be a little harsher on memes in the sense that I really was trying to allude that the science of semiotics preceded Dawkins' understanding of memes, but his memes caught on. And I think what he initially intended is not exactly where it's come, and I believe that's what you were saying. But I think the idea of studying the sign and the symbol, what is the key signifier at the root of something? Just because a cat with a funny saying makes you laugh, you know, why is that? What is really happening, right? What is really taking place? And so I think breaking those down into what is the significant core meaning that's really being transmitted is what we should be trying to do. Roland Barthes talked about the idea of memes and mythology, and the idea that we can be just consumers of things, or we can be persons who interrogate and interpret things. And by doing that, we tear them apart, we tear them down. We, you know, Derrida would say we did deconstruction. Within our own context, we use what we know to deconstruct that, to find meaning in what it is. And I don't think that we are actually, as a society as a whole, practicing that type of critical thinking. I think we're just being more passive in what we do, is going, oh, that's just something harmless. That's a symbol or whatever else. Or the idea of things that aren't true, but they're entertaining, right? And a person says, well, it's not fun to tear that down and destroy that. It's more fun to laugh at it and pass it along. And that harmfulness goes into all the rest of what we start to normalize, and which I think is dangerous, is that norms are the danger. Everybody wants to gravitate towards the norm and the normal behavior and the normal understanding, but I think we need a little more radicalness in how we're looking at things, and a little more critical nature in what we're doing, because telling people that this is the norm and others that don't conform to the norm don't fit is where we get into a lot of the dangers and a lot of the harm that we see in culture and societies across the board. So I think I agree with you that there needs to be more, that the meme itself, as I said earlier, is just, some people think it's just fugacious. It's whatever, it's fine. But I think semiotics is the science and the tool which would help us to better understand what those are, and looking at them from not just the sign that they are, but what is the signifiers that are at the core of whatever that meme is, and finding the heart and the root of that, and expressing that. And as researchers and academics and writers, those should be the things maybe we need to be doing and be better at, is having the tools to do that work.
Thank you. It looks like our next question is from Spencer. Spencer, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Jim. And as I was listening to your presentation, I now realize why there was always a large number of students trying to get in your classes, and you did an excellent job of making a complex subject very understandable. So thank you. I'm going to build a little bit on what Bill said and then bring my question to you. But Bill mentioned this idea that some memes are, they may be good, some are bad, some are maybe don't have any kind of impact. And going back to that meme gene analogy, that's the same with genes. Some mutations are good, some are bad, some are just neutral. And you had mentioned this idea of socialization, again, with the meme gene analogy. If you have basically a certain genetic makeup, the environment plays a role in the way that's expressed. If you have a certain mimetic makeup of ideas and thoughts in your brain, socialization affects the way that's expressed. So the analogy holds up there. But there's been some recent changes in our world that caused me to ask you this question. When we had a primitive brain, the ideas and memes resided in our brain, in our relations with others. We created an organizational memory. With the advent of technology, printing press, internet, is it possible that ideas are not just residing in our brain, but are now residing in this huge network? And what is going to be the role of artificial intelligence on meaning making? Is there something that we should be concerned about? Is there something we need to be aware of? I mean, that's my question to you.
I think it's the artifacts. You're talking about the artifacts. You're talking about all the things we can create now that are artifacts. And I think that the artifacts still trigger understanding in the human brain. You can read a book. I can read a book, right? You can come out on the other end of that book with the general understanding that we both know these were the characters, this was the basic storyline, and this is how it ended. But I think there's more to that when I read the book, I may, through interpolation, be more connected to one particular character based on how I was socialized than you are. And so your interpretation of whether the interactions between particular characters in a story came out the way that you think they should could be based on that interpolation. And so there's also the idea that artifact makes a connection to what are your memories, right, that you have as well. What are these sort of things that are connected to your past that are not connected to my past? And so there's this general overarching understanding, and I think that's the meme of things, right? It's the society for the most part gets the meme, but then there are others who look at the meme and go, but what is it really saying? What is going on here? And one person gets a slightly different perspective on it in that way. So I think I think you're right about the artifacts, and the artifacts exist, but the artifacts are just complicated collections of signs that the brain then interprets, and every mind, not just the brain, the mind is going to interpret that in a different and particular way based on socialization, genetics. There's stuff from genetics in each of us too that I agree with you on that sort of alter and affect how we see things. But I still would hold to the point that you can walk into a room, right? And I can walk into a room, and the things about the room, the shape, the structure, the books on the shelf, the different things are going to trigger different understandings of whether this room speaks to me in a certain way, to for lack of a better term, that I feel connected to the room, or I feel repulsed by the room, or I feel bound or unbound in the room. I feel safe in the room. I don't feel safe in the room. I feel like I can be productive in this room, or I feel like I can be relaxed and comfortable in this room, right? All of those different things are based on the individual, regardless of how someone intends the room to be, right? The architect of the room each individual is going to interpret it in a different way. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, or it just means that you and I are going to have a lot longer conversations.
I just have a follow-up on it, though. Take your room analogy.
Mm-hmm.
I think of us as a species,
Mm-hmm.
and the globe is our room, the biosphere. And we're coming at it with all these different perspectives. I'm concerned, I wonder, will there be a tragedy of the commons because of the fact that we are unable to have some collective action? And this is out of your purview, it was not the purpose of your talk, but I think it's an underlying concern that we are creating all these different meanings and we're not really able to address some of the common needs of humanity. When we were small organizations in primitive times, we could do that. Our organization had memory, it survived with the environment. But now we're this huge global community with this challenge. Do you see that this having ramifications in that area in some way?
Yeah, I do. And I think your point about being a small organization, it goes, you could use the same example to talk about 200-300 years ago when a town was 30 miles apart, right? They didn't really influence each other too much. But with the advent of technology, all of a sudden 30 miles apart is nothing at all. And so now these towns start to look the same. They start to have the same things. They see something in one town, they want it in this town. So isolation can have some aspect of preservation, I think, when it comes to cultural understanding, organizational memory, those types of things. But in the broader sense, which I think is what you're talking about, there's the global understanding now of where we're moving into. And I think that global understanding is still in its infancy, though. So I'm not sure we have enough information, because yes, we're less isolated. Yes, we're more global. Yes, we're starting to change somewhat, but I don't know if we learned how to read the room yet. And I think we're still in the process of determining how to do that.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. We're in the process. Hopefully we can do it faster than the environment changes on us.
True.
Thank you. It looks like our next question is from Donna. Donna, did you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. I'm new to this group and saw the ad for the conference and just thought I'd pop in. So it's a very different area than I'm used to. I'm a health sciences dean, and my background is all in healthcare. So one of the things in my deanship that I've been trying to do is to improve healthcare in our area by enhancing the knowledge of our students around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also how the social determinants in one's environment impact health. Because the reality is only 20% of any individual's health is really dictated by the healthcare they receive from a clinician. The rest is all the social determinants of health. And our students need to learn a lot more about that, and then learn how to deal with it. And so we've made strides in this area, started out with some education of our faculty because they needed to learn more. And when I say they, I mean myself as well. So we've been doing a lot of work on that, and we're developing curriculum. It's the first time we'll be inserting curriculum across the college on any topic at all. And so that's exciting work. What I'm worried about is this is something that needs to be sustained over time. And right now there's some energy around it and it's going well. We're just starting to implement curriculum, but how do I sustain that energy? Because this really is a cultural shift for us in the college. And I'm just looking for advice on how to sustain that and advance it as we progress.
I have talked about this, not today more so, but I have talked about this in the past. And I think there's two things to think about. when you think about, you're talking about the college itself, it has history, it has memory, it has certain ways in which it's understood. That ability to change and shift has as much to do with the external influences on it as much as the internal influences. And no one person, I think, can make changes. I've talked to small organizations before and different individuals over the years, and I've had a lot of persons who come in and say, I want to move this change. I want to move this organization to a particular location. I want to go, I want to do these things. And so they do, and then they leave. And like a rubber band, it snaps back into what it was before. And I think so. The first thing I think is really to do a cultural understanding of the organization itself, to really, really step back and understand what is this organization beyond just the individuals that currently exist in it. What is its history? How has it been? How has it existed? What is it known for? What are the outside external influences say about this place? How do they define this organization? Coming to sort of laying out a basis of how it's known beyond current leadership, current persons, current programmings, those types of things. And then begin to look at, then where does that shift and change have to take place? And I think change takes place in multiple fronts, in multiple ways. And so you have to lay out a plan that says, if I want to have a really huge shift or change in an organization that's going to exist in the same geographical location with the same physical structures and the same sort of infrastructure that existed before, I am somehow going to have the support of every influential body that's going to shape this place, from the board of trustees to the persons that support it financially, and to even the people that employ your graduates from the College of Health Sciences. And so that's a huge task. So it can't be you, it can't be your team. It has to be something that you begin to, and this is where I think semiotics comes into play. I think we didn't talk about this, but the power of understanding how symbol and sign and semiotics works down to the letters, the pictures, whatever is being communicated, and really having a firm grasp on that begins to shape how change takes place. And so, I don't know how much time we have, Elizabeth, or what we're doing, but if I would go back historically, I could go back into the Saxon gospel and the healing hand, and just bear with me for a second, where the Catholic Church, they were trying to convert all the Germanic tribes over to Christianity. And so they would go into these villages and places, and they would say, look, here's this religion, you need to believe this, we're telling you why, we've defeated you physically, and so be baptized or be killed. That was sort of the thing they had. So people were like, I don't want to be killed. Okay, we'll do the baptism. When the influence left, they would revert back to who they were. And because what they didn't understand was the message they were telling them was contradictory to the mythology that had existed with them since the beginning of time. They were Nordic. They believed in the world tree. They believed that the only way to get into the bowels of heavens, up into the tree where the Valkyries were, was to die victoriously in battle. And so when someone comes in and conquers you and says, now be peaceful, they're really telling you, go to hell. And because if you don't fight and die in battle, you're not going to go there. And so what really changed that was not the 30 years of war that took place. What changed it was an epic poem written by a monk who had come out of that culture called the Heliand, the Saxon Gospel. And so that Heliand took their mythologies, their stories, their words. He understood it very well. And he rewrote it in such a way that said, hey, there's this warrior Christ and his retinue of warriors who had a hill fort in Jerusalem, and he battled the ultimate battle that ever existed. And so by doing that, your association with him automatically opens up the pathway to the fields, right? To move on. And so if you associate with him, you're going to move into this new thing. And so that actually is what's been accredited to ending that and to conquering the Germanic tribe. Now, that can also be seen as co-opting someone else's culture in such a way to influence them to change. But that to me shows you the power, and that was short, I know it's really quick, but the power of myth and symbol and sign to change. So what's the story? And if you want to change the story, you have to figure out how to communicate effectively. And that would go back down into the communities around you, even the persons who don't value healthcare and don't see themselves and understand health. It's the same thing. You have to be able to speak the language of the people that you want to change. And so that's the only way. And it can't come from you. It has to be theirs. They have to own it. And once the community surrounding the organization, everyone is saying the same things. If you ever have a moment when you go into a meeting and someone comes to you in a year or two and says, hey, you know, this is a really great plan or idea, let me tell you about it. And it sounds like what you would say word for word, you know that you're making change. Because it's not you anymore, it's someone else's voice doing it. So that's big, that's broad, that has to do with organizational change. It has to do with semiotics and mythologies and everything else that we talk about. But it really is the power of interdisciplinary studies where we have to step outside of where we are and bring in whatever resources, whatever experts. You might look in your humanities departments and find people who could really speak to this. And I know, having worked at a College of Health Sciences, the humanities are there. I don't speak for yours, but they're not typically seen as the foundation or the core of the institution. The health sciences are. But I think that those persons, you might find some valuable persons in there that can really help you to look at cultural change and speak to who you are as an organization. So an untapped resource might be right there for you.
Okay. Thank you. I will reach out to my colleagues.
Thank you. It looks like we don't have any other questions, and we're coming up on the hour, so I can begin to wrap up. I just wanted to encourage everyone to watch the digital media and comment on the discussion boards. And I want to thank James for giving that amazing presentation. And in a couple of hours, we have the closing talking circle at 11. I posted a link for that in the chat. And this recording of James's session will be uploaded later today, and you can continue the discussion and ask questions there. But I hope to see everyone at the closing talking circle, and thank you again, and thank you for attending. Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.